So this is the lecture on language. So before I start the lecture though, I want to say, you guys had your second exam. So I'm recording this lecture right now on Saturday morning, but you guys are probably watching it later. But just so you know, so you guys had your exam that was due last night, second exam, and on Friday and even like Thursday and Wednesday I was receiving them. So it looks as if you guys, everyone turned them in, and I'll start grading those, pretty much right away. So I know before with your first exam I was really sick for like a week, and so I got those back to you much later than I normally would have. And so usually like with the exams I try not to go longer than a week, because I know you guys want to know what you got, want your score and stuff. So I'll be getting those back to you much sooner than I did with the first one, And in fact, I'm going to be starting those this weekend, so a handful of you should start to see those coming in with their grades and notes and stuff. I feel like there was something else. I don't think so. Okay. Most of you guys see on top of all the assignments, whether it's the exams or the annual editions. Usually, so I will say that I did notice that there's maybe, out of like my whole class, there's maybe like 2 people who didn't turn in an exam too, but also this is usually around the time when I start getting some people dropping the class, so I'm assuming that's what happened. But if that's not the case, if that's you, if you're like, oh shit, I forgot about the exam, remember that you can still turn it in late. It's only 10% off per day. Don't ever think, oh, it's a day late or 2 days late or even 3 or 4 days late, and that you can't still turn it in, because even getting a 65% or a 70% or whatever is better than a 0%. So just keep that in mind. And just like as many of you know, if something comes up, please reach out to me. I'm always willing to work with you on helping before assignments are due, after they're due. Just communicate with me and we'll figure something out. Okay, so let's get started on language. So we're on the PowerPoint language, so slide 2. Here's a picture of Waffle. You guys all know her from, well, she's hiding. She's like right there. You can see her. She'll probably pop her head up in a second. But so the point of this slide is language is arbitrary, and what we mean by that is, like, we have all agreed that when we say, like, when we make certain sounds and we put those sounds together, those make words, and those words like have like symbolic meaning in our minds. Like that's what language is. For whatever language you're speaking, we've all kind of agreed, like, in terms of like whatever language we speak, like this is how we communicate. But there's something innate about any of the words. There's no, and this is the point of the slide. There's like when we think of the word dog, there's no like innate connection between the word dog, how it sounds for whatever language, and what an actual dog is. There's nothing about the word dog, how we write it out, that looks like a dog. There's no like innate connection. It's just we've all agreed that is like this combination of sounds in our minds represents this particular thing. That's what language is. Now, there are a couple of exceptions to this. There's something called onomatopoeia. Most of you probably heard of this. So that's when there is kind of a little bit more of a connection where the word actually does sound like the thing it's trying to describe. So like I always think of the word buzz as a really good one. The word buzz literally sounds like the thing that it is. So the word itself kind of sounds like it, but most words aren't like that. They're completely arbitrary. So like, just like I have here with this, like for dog, that it's, the word dog doesn't look like, when you spell it out, doesn't look like a dog. The word dog, when you say that word, doesn't sound like the sound a dog makes or anything like that. It's all just, we all just agreed, like this is how, this word means this. And also think of it in terms of like the symbolic meaning. And what I mean by that, it's not like, don't think of it, I think we often hear the word symbolism and we think something else, but what I mean by that for language is, we have agreed, like you take that, you see those letters, those shapes written down or typed out, and your mind goes to that symbolizes this thing in my head, and you picture a dog. You might picture your dog, you might picture someone else's dog, you might picture like 100 dogs, but there's a symbolic connection. That's what I mean by that. Okay, slide 3, displacement. So talking about humans versus non-human language. So I know I mentioned this before, that obviously we know humans are not the only intelligent species, clearly. And in fact, hopefully you, you know what, did I post that in your PowerPoint? There was this really great video on the primates. It might have been from my other class. God, I always do that. I'm sorry. I can never remember which class it was. Okay, never mind. But anyway, like I've talked about it enough that you know that, you know, we're not the only smart species. We're definitely not the best at everything. There are plenty of things that we're really good at and things that we're not even in the top 10 of animals, you know. But as far as we know about, you know, some of the research with language, even though we definitely know that other animals have very complex forms of communication, and I think that there's probably a lot that we don't know yet, but based on what we do know, it seems as if there are some unique things to human language that we don't see in other animals. Now, like I said before, I would asterisk this with, we just don't know yet. I have a feeling that there's probably a lot more going on with a lot of other animals and their way they communicate than we like realize. I think that's our bias. So kind of keep that in mind too. But in terms of what we know now, and the fact that we can kind of pick apart our own language a lot more, you know, speaks to some of the things I have coming up right now. So this first thing is called displacement. So, like I said, as far as what we know, it seems as if humans are probably the only animals. Well, you know what, now that I'm thinking about it, I feel like there was a recent study on chimpanzees about something similar to this. So there's always a caveat. But I mean, that's the great thing about science. But okay. So I'll say this is like generally true. Now I'm like second guessing myself. Okay. There's something called displacement. Basically, it's this idea that when we think about how other animals communicate, typically we think of them communicating about things that are happening right then and there. Like, here's some food, or watch out, there's a predator. Things that are happening, like either that have just happened, like, hey, I just saw food right over there, like a second ago, or things that are currently happening in that moment, like, watch out, you know, there comes that bear, or something like that. Things that are like happening in the moment. And that humans have the ability to kind of communicate beyond that in like the immediate like time vicinity. So here's a couple of examples of this. So we can talk about things that, well, one, we can talk about things that are hypothetical. Like we can like imagine this scenario, or, you know, what are your plans for the future? We can think about things that haven't actually happened and that might not actually happen. We have the ability to talk about things that happened in the past. Like we can say, we're not just always talking about things that are currently happening, like we see with other animals. We often talk about things that happened in the past, you know, like last week, last month, and we can refer to those events to other people who were there or who were not there. We have the ability to communicate that. So we can talk about things in the past, we can talk about things in the present, obviously, and then we can talk about things that might happen in the future. And we also can talk about people who are not present. And like I said before, I think that there is some research coming out with apes. I feel like that's showing that some of this that we would think is uniquely human probably isn't. And like, I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 10 or 15 years we see a lot more research on this. In fact, I know they're doing a lot of research with like dolphin communication. So this is not 100% like just unique to us. As far as I'm understanding it, like I said, in general, it's probably true, but I feel like there's a lot of really interesting research that's going to come out soon. But the other last point that we can talk about people who are not present. Like I said, for the majority of other animals, this doesn't seem to be a thing that they can do. And you might be thinking, well, like, why is that important? And when we start talking about humans as primates, humans as mammals, but definitely humans as primates, humans as a very social species, the social and cultural implications and interactions that we have are so important to pretty much everything we do. And in fact, this was a question on your last exam, and I had received a few before the exam was due, I received a few questions from students asking to kind of clarify what I was looking for, and it was a little more of an open-ended question. But it was about population size, like how does population size change our cultural or social interactions? And I expect to kind of see a lot of different answers from you guys. That's totally fine. I mean, that's one of those questions where it's a little more open-ended. I'm expecting you guys to kind of think a little beyond, just, reciting the PowerPoint to me. But like, as I mentioned a little bit when we were talking about agriculture, and it's definitely going to come up a lot more now. And so I was trying to get you guys to kind of start thinking about that. But with this idea of being able to talk about people who aren't there, it goes back to this idea that we are a very social species, and social information is very important. And so being able to talk about people who are not currently there is vital to who we are, in our species. So imagine, we in mid-sentence I forgot what I was going to say. I know I'm kind of given this example a handful of times, but imagine we're in a group of like 50, because evolutionarily that's how we evolved. So like our minds are still kind of in that mindset a little bit. So imagine we're in a group of like 50 people. That's the population we live in. Being able to know all the information about all those people is going to be really important, because it can make or break whether you eat that day, whether you survive. If you need to know who you can trust, who you can't, who's reliable, who's not, who's really good at finding the best fruit, who's really good at following the animals the best. If you're hunting, you have everyone in your group. All that information about other people, and reproduction as well. Who's a good potential mate, who can be trusted, who can't be, who's going to help provide resources to offspring, who wouldn't be good at that. Like, knowing all that social information about everyone is really important. Social information in general is really important to us because of that. And so, which is why, I think culturally we have this idea like, oh, gossip is bad and a negative, but like as primates, it's actually like really important that we do that. And also there have been studies showing that like if it's done like not at like an extreme vicious level, but that it actually can cause like more cohesion within groups. And this is true. Like as primates, it's very important. Social information is very important, and we remember it very easily because we are adapted to remember it, because it's like it can be vital to our survival. Which is why you probably remember a rumor you heard 10 years ago versus what you learned in math class like 4 days ago. Our brains are just like primed to absorb social information. And so getting back to this point on the PowerPoint about people who are not present, like being able to talk about people who are not present, like, oh, did you hear about so-and-so? They're not very good at this one thing. That's going to be really important to being able to talk, positive and negative talk about people when they're not present. So a lot of interesting things, like I said, that humans can do in our language ability. I think that it's probably not 100% unique to us, but for the most part it is. Okay, slide 4. Human language is learned. So remember we talked about this with culture. Culture is, learned, it's shared and learned and symbolic. So language is part of that it's learned. It's not innate. Like you are not born being able to speak language at all, but specifically any particular language, you have to learn it. Now, because of evolution, our brains have very specific areas that are for language production and language comprehension. So evolutionarily, like there's a part of our brain that's like ready for that, but it's not like. But you have to have that social interaction to be able to learn and create that language. Like if you were born and you didn't have any other humans around you talking, you would never learn how to speak. And in fact, unfortunately, there have been a handful of severe abuse cases where children have been basically not spoken to and like locked away, and then later in life they can't communicate. Like after the first 5 or 6 years, if you don't get that social interaction, if you don't get that language interaction, your brain is just like, well, it's too late. Which is why you probably hear this a lot with young children. You're supposed to talk to them a lot because they have to learn it. And you probably even notice this with young children, that they often get some like grammar wrong, But over time though, it'll self-correct because they hear it more. Like they have to have that practice of hearing it, of trying it themselves. And also, like, because those first few years are really important, this is why it's much easier for you to be bilingual if you get that language, different languages, and like basically as like a young child, like under 10, but definitely like under like 5 or 6. If you get that, your brain just like absorbs it. It's like, yep, 2-3 languages, no problem. But when you're trying to learn, like, I think this is probably the case for most people, but I took a second language in high school, and it's like, by then your brain's like really trying to take in that information, but it's much more difficult. So I mean, in reality, I think there are some schools that do this where they do like you learn a second language at a really young age, and it's like multiple studies show like it's the best time to learn, and learning it as an adult, basically anytime after puberty, it's just like it's so much more difficult. Like some people can, there's always the exception to the rule, but most people, it's just not going to happen. So I got way off topic there, but so human language is learned. You have to learn it, which is why you can be, and it's not innate to like you like ancestrally in terms of like regionally. So if you are born in like in one part of the world, but maybe you're adopted into another part, you're going to learn the language that is being spoken to you. It doesn't matter like what your like biological parents spoke. That's not that way. It's a learned experience. Okay, slide 5. I think I have. Okay, yeah. So this is just getting at this idea that language is diverse. Most people don't realize that how many languages actually currently exist. And I made this PowerPoint maybe like a year or 2 ago. So I think the numbers might be different because we see like unfortunately like languages dying out all the time. There's a lot of research to try to preserve languages that we know where like there's only a handful of speakers of it left. So if you go to slide 6, you'll see these are just the language families. These aren't even like the individual languages, but the language families. You can see just how many language families there are globally, and then within each of those, there's like multiple languages. Okay, slide 7. So a little more about human versus non-human language. This idea of it being a closed versus open system. So we think of, for the most part, non-human types of communication is what we call a closed system. So often we see that it doesn't seem, as far as we know, that they can't, whichever way they're communicating. Like birds is a good example. We see like there are certain like songs that they have to learn how to produce, like in order to like call a mate or something. There are certain ways that they have to do it, and there's no kind of leeway for them to express it differently. That can often be problematic. But for humans, we have ways of really like expanding our language. I mean, you could right now like come up with a new word and make your friends start using it, suddenly we have a new word. We can also say things in different combinations that we maybe have never said before. And in fact, let me see if I have this on another PowerPoint. Okay, no, I don't. I don't have this later in this PowerPoint, but it just got me thinking about it. I'll say it now. That, like, what's a word that we use now? So I'm asking you, like, think about this. What's a word that we use now that we didn't use, like 10 years ago or 15 years ago? I'm trying to think. Usually, like, slang words are really good at this because, like, slang, we see, like, every few years there's something new. I'm trying to think. There was, I can't even think of one. I'll think of one that's going to pop into my head. But you can already, I think you're probably thinking of words right now. Like, think of a slang word you used, you use now that you didn't use before. Or even opposite, how, so, dang it, I'm like on the spot. That's why I'm on the spot. I see the thing like recording. I'm like, think of a word. Well, this isn't a very good example, but it's just one that popped to my mind because I want to be able to give you guys an example. So like when I was because I'm old, when I was in high school, we said like, that's cool. And like, that's, I think one of those slang words that people kind of, multiple generations we still use. But I remember like later, people were like, that's chill. And I was like, what? That's not a new word, but we're using it differently. But there's got to be new words. Okay, you know what? Let's make this an extra credit. Because I know when I've used this in this, when I've proposed this question in my classes, like in person, they always have really good examples, and now I'm blanking on one. Okay, so here's extra credit. Ooh. Pause real quick. Yes. I'm recording a lecture, so you're fine. Just if you walk in the background, then they're gonna see you. What was I saying? Oh yeah, extra credit. So if you, so this would be the extra credit. Like I'll give you like 1 point each, up to let's say 3. You can give me 3. So just in an email, you don't need to give me a big long paragraph. Literally, just send me some words. Send me some words that you use now that you didn't use before, and it could be like a slang word or whatever. In fact, I remember last semester when I posed this question, one of my students was like, now I can't even remember, but I think she was like AirPods, and I was like, what? AirPods, and I was like, I feel like I'm not hearing you right. She's like, AirPods. I'm like, what is that? And she was like, oh, the thing. I hope that's the right. Is that the right term? Yeah. The things you like, the wireless, and I was like, oh my gosh. So like, I was like, I feel like old. I don't even know what that is. But so that was an example of a word that, or like a phrase for new technology. That's definitely one, new technologies. Okay, so like I said, extra credit if you send me, like I said, up to 3 words. I'll give you a point each. A word that we use now that we didn't, like a new word, or using it in a different way. So that's the extra credit. Okay, so slide 8. So human, and I already kind of mentioned a few of these. Human language is abstract. We can, like I said, we can hypothesize about things in the future. We can talk about things that aren't currently happening. And as far as we know, other animals don't have the ability to do this. We have the ability to relay very technical information, which sometimes other people might not understand. So like we have the ability, even if you're speaking the same language as someone, to talk about things that they may not understand just because of the specialization of the terminology. So it's just like language can be very complex, and even if you speak that language, it still might be something that you can't quite understand. So just think of this idea like language is very complex in that, and very like layered. And also, I think I said this one already, but humans, we have the ability to make up sentences that we've never said before. It's not always we have to repeat, like with the example with birds, that we are having to like repeat the same phrases. We can make up new things all the time that have very specific meanings and can be meaningful in other ways. So like I gave this example, it's very specific example, but like you could probably think of your own sentence, you could probably think right now and make up a sentence of a combination of words that you have never used in that combination before. So this, like I said, this allows human language to be so much more, complex. Okay, slide 9. So I have a video here, and I'm pretty sure I had a similar video when we did the primate section, but this is talking about primate language. So like I said, take the moment to watch that video. I'm not going to watch the video with you. Slide 10, language change. So we talked about this with anthropology, and more of a focus on it with the evolutionary stuff, but change over time is very important for all subfields of anthropology. So we're looking at language. This is true as well. So look at this photo, and you'll see we have Old English, Middle English, Early Modern, and then Late Modern. And between, like from the first one to the last one, is only like less than 1,000 years. Probably somewhere between 500 and 1,000 years. Not that long in the grand scheme of things. But look at the differences. Now, if you go from late modern to like just one step before early modern, like, oh, I can definitely understand that. go back a little bit more to Middle English, you're like, okay, like I can pick out, 70% of that without even a problem. But if you keep, it gets harder and harder. And the fact that you already know, like, what the words are, you're like, oh, I can kind of see the connection. But if I only gave you that very first one, you'd probably have a difficult time trying to figure out what it was saying, right? But this is like language is changing all the time like this. And we see this because of migration, because of trading, because of, war, that there is, constantly different influences on any particular language, being influenced by others, influencing others, getting more people who speak that language, having fewer people who speak that language, so it's constantly changing. And in fact, you could probably think right now of, even if we were talking about English, words that we use, like we would think, oh, it's an English word, but in fact have very obvious roots in another language. So I always think of the word déjà vu is a really good one. So we say that, but that's obviously like a French, expression. But we say that all the time. But there are like so many other examples. Okay, so slide 11, language and culture. Colloquialisms, or like cultural expressions. We use these all the time. And so you guys are going to be writing the ethnography paper soon, and I in the instructions for that I have some like helpful writing tips. And in science, you want to avoid these always in scientific writing. In other courses, maybe you need to use them more, but in scientific writing, you want to avoid these. Because what ends up happening is when you start to use cultural expressions, you're not conveying the actual information. And you might be thinking, well, like, what's a cultural expression? So here I just have a few examples of this. So here's one stuff related to baseball. So expressions, we might say, you're way off base. Let's touch base later. She went to bat for me. So when you think about that, if I said to you, oh, you're way off base, you probably know what that means. But that actual phrase isn't actually conveying that. So if I said you're way off base, you're thinking, oh, that means like, well, you're wrong or you're misinformed. But literally, it's not a literal translation of that. Like it has like a metaphorical meaning to us. And we do this all the time in our language, and it makes our language much more rich and complex. But in scientific writing, like I said, you want to avoid this because you want to try to convey the actual factual like information. And also we see a lot of like generational differences or cultural, obviously it's a cultural thing, it's cultural differences. You want to be able to communicate with people who might be a little younger or older, or maybe from a different culture. You can't use these types of expressions, so you want to avoid them. And some are really obvious, like if you're writing like, oh, I can't use that, that's obviously a cultural expression. But sometimes they don't seem as obvious, and so usually every time I tell my students, like, be really extra careful when you're writing your papers, don't use any cultural expressions. A couple slip through because we use them so often. In fact, I probably already used a handful in this lecture. So I always think of the one, there's a couple of examples. So quitting cold turkey seems like such a weird expression, but like if I told you like, oh yeah, I quit smoking cold turkey, you would know what that meant. Like it would mean like right away, like didn't taper off, just like boom, quit. But like where did that expression come from? There's probably a very specific historical origin of it that's probably really interesting. But anyone else from another culture would be like, I have no idea what that even references. It's such a weird connection to that, But also, it might be a phrase that's dying out. So if I ask someone who's maybe like, maybe even your age, maybe you've never even heard that. In fact, years ago, an older family member said the phrase, hedge your bets. And I was like, wait, what? And she's like, hedge your bets. And I was like, I have no idea what that means. She's like, you've never heard of that expression? I was like, no. And so I had to Google it, and so apparently it means like something like, you're being cautious or something to that effect. I was like, okay. And it was like a reference, I guess, to like gambling, and I was like, okay, like that. I was like, I get the reference, and like contextually, I was like, okay, but I'd never heard it before, and so this is one of those things. Like I was saying, if you're reading a paper, someone trying to convey information to you, you want to have the factual information, so you want to avoid those types of expressions in scientific writing. But in terms of how we communicate with each other every day, it's definitely something we do. I think it makes every language makes them more rich and interesting. But like I said, we don't notice how often we do them. Okay, so slide 12. Okay, so what are some other cultural expressions, colloquialisms that you can think of? So obviously we were in class. Usually we end up spending like half the class talking about these and laughing and sharing. Because even like regionally in the United States, we see a lot of really interesting different ones from like people who live in the South or the West Coast or East Coast, and they're all very different, you know. So actually let's make that another extra credit. I'm like in the extra credit room today. So also send me, I'll let you have up to 3. I'll give you a point each for some kind of colloquialism or cultural expression. Yeah, so like I said before, up to 3 points, 1 point each for 3 words or phrases that are either new words or a phrase that we use differently now. And also I'll give you up to 3 for this one, so cultural expressions or colloquialism. So like I said, if you said, you know, and I think I give a couple on the directions for the paper too, like she gave me the cold shoulder. Like that's a good one, an example, because when you hear that you think that means like she, you know, was rude to you, or maybe she avoided you or something. But like think of it this way, like there's literally no shoulder, it's not actually cold, it has a very specific meaning, we understand what it means, but the actual information that we're hearing or seeing or reading is not the actual thing that's happening. So that's what I mean by a cultural expression or colloquialism. Okay, so you like already halfway through this PowerPoint, you guys have 2 opportunities for extra credit. Okay, let's go to slide 13. This is just getting at a little bit more about like the complexities of language, depending on your culture as well. Like language sometimes can be how you communicate, whether it's vague or more precise, whether you are more like blunt or upfront versus more like demure, is going to often be like, you know, dictated by the culture and the type of language. So just another way of getting at like language, there's different styles, and even when you're communicating, when you're verbally communicating, how you're, not just the words you're saying, but like the tone, the volume also has a lot of meaning also in the language. Slide 14, silence. Even this, like in terms of communication, even pauses in between words or phrases, even that can have a lot of meaning to us. Negative and positive depending on what culture you're from. Sometimes pausing for long periods of time is a sign of respect. Sometimes it's like, why aren't you telling me what you think? Like, it really just depends on the culture of how the silence is taken, whether it's negative or positive. You can go behind me. Okay, so slide 15. Just make sure you close the door so I don't get the glare. Okay. So language and advertising. Okay, sorry, Alice. You stuck with mom. Okay. So here we have a couple examples. So you probably have heard the I don't even know if they still do these ads anymore, the Got Milk advertisements, but you know, obviously those were very popular, like in the 90s and early 2000s, super popular. But you have to be careful with how they're translated, because as you can see here, sometimes these translations, if they're not culturally specific or even like too literal of a translation, the same meaning doesn't come across. So Got Milk versus like, are you lactating, is clearly a very different meaning that is being conveyed. Also, and this one's like older, you can see I even have the picture for Come Alive with Pepsi, it's like from, you know, like decades ago. But Come Alive with Pepsi, to me, if you're seeing that ad, you might think, oh, I'm gonna have a lot of energy, or it's like I'm gonna be invigorated by this drink, versus a Pepsi brings your dead ancestors back from the grave, is not the same thing you want to convey at all. Okay, slide 16, dialects. Oh, so this is like, even if we're all speaking the same language, let's take the United States. And so obviously we know like the English language is spoken in all parts of the country. But even if you take people from the West Coast or East Coast or the South or the Northwest, we're going to have very different ways of saying. We're going to have different cultural expressions. But even when we're just talking, using the same words, that the accent that we have will be different, and the other things like the speed at which we speak will be different. And the point I want to make with this, like all of us understand, like there are dialects. But just also to make it clear, there's no standard. It's not like, well, Midwest is the standard and everyone else is just kind of deviating from that. No, like they're all just different. They're all regional, and unique and interesting in their own way. There isn't. While unfortunately, I think people have this in their mind, like when they hear people with a certain dialect, they're like, oh, that person's this or that. We have like these, stereotypes we associate with them. But one isn't better or worse. Your dialect doesn't imply your level of education or intelligence or anything like that. In fact, okay, so like now that you've met, my boyfriend, sort of in the background, when we first started dating, so he's from the East Coast, and we were saying some words to each other. He's like, how do you say that word? I was like, wait, how did you say it? And so we just kind of had a fun time with like picking it apart, like how we say certain words and stuff. So it's just kind of funny. But okay, so here's the fun part of this PowerPoint, one of my favorite parts. It's so unfortunate that we're not in class for these. Okay, so this is just a little fun exercise that we can do, so just take a moment as we go through these. Okay, so this is when we're looking at, regional stuff, even for talking about English, and we're all speaking the same language, but looking at different parts of the country and how we have these different dialects. So let's see the first one. So slide 17. So here's the question. What word do you use to address a group of two or more people? And do you say you guys? Do you say you, like in the plural? Do you say y'all? Or do you say you all? And you can see based on the coloring, and the map, where which expression is used, in which part of the country. This one seems kind of fairly evenly split between you guys and y'all, being kind of very north and south, so that one kind of makes sense. I try to avoid you guys because I feel like it's very gendered, but it definitely slips out. I think it's also like a West Coast thing too, Okay, slide 18. How do you say that word? Like that word right there on the top on slide 18. How do you say that? Do you say it? There's multiple options, right? Do you say pecan? Do you say pecan? Do you say pecan? Or do you say pecan? But now you're thinking, how do I say it? Waffle. Just making that licky noise. Good girl, thank you. And then I when I've asked my students this in the past, they say, well, it kind of depends if I'm talking about whether I'm talking about so I had one student say oh, if I'm saying a pecan, I just say it that way. But if I'm saying it's a pecan pie, it's kind of like a thing, way you say that term. I'm like, okay. So but there are different ways of saying it, right? And you can kind of see based on the map, it seems like there's a huge mixture of how it's said. So it's interesting. Okay. So slide 19. How do you say pajamas? Do you say pajamas? Or do you say pajamas? Or do you say I would say I'd say PJs, right? You say PJs. That other, yeah, right. I think a lot of people say PJs, but you can see this one's very strong, pajamas. Wait, let me see. Pajamas seems to be there's very another kind of north, south, East Coast a little bit. Pajamas. Sounds, I feel like if I said pajamas, I'm going to be in flannel, but if I said I'm putting on my pajamas, it's going to be something really fancy. I don't know, Okay. My favorite one, everyone. Okay. How do you say that word? You can see based on the map, it's very strong. People have very strong opinions on this. I say that lawyer. Lawyer. But apparently everyone says, no, I'm wrong. Now, I'm not wrong if I'm from the South, but I say lawyer And everyone else apparently says lawyer, which I think is so strange. And I always say, you practice the law, you don't practice the law. And I feel like it's so accurate. Like it's spelled lawyer, but I feel like, I'm obviously like, at least in terms of like here, regionally here, like everyone else says it the other way. I always joke that I say it the right way and everyone else says it the wrong way. Of course we know like that's not how it works. But when I hear it, people say lawyer, it sticks wrong in my ear. Like that word specifically, lawyer. But how do you say it? Do you say lawyer or do you say lawyer? And like I said, based on that map, you see there's a huge, like very like stark difference between like north and south on that one. Okay, what's this? But the next one, do you say, is this word mayonnaise 2 syllables or 3? Do you say mayonnaise or do you say mayonnaise? Or do you say mayo? I say mayo, right? Mayo? Mayonnaise sometimes. So I would say 2 syllables. Mayonnaise, mayonnaise sounds like a lot of extra work. But you can see here, this is once again kind of a north-south thing. It seems like it's a little more, mayonnaise is a little more like really northern, a little more strongly there. Everywhere else it kind of seems like, it's not like a super strong in any particular region. Okay, the next word. Oh, what do you call a traffic? This is very detailed. What do you call a traffic situation in which several roads meet in a circle and you have to get off at a certain point? Roundabout, right? Like I learned roundabout. And there's some options here. Do you call it a traffic circle? Which I'd never heard before, but like that makes sense. It's a circle. Roundabout to me is like, of course, that's how I always learned it. That's how I always say it. And it's a cute way of saying it's a roundabout. Apparently there's an option for, I have no word for this, because probably they just don't have them wherever that's at, And then also, interestingly, in New England, they call it a rotary. So that's very interesting. But yeah, roundabout. I don't think I've ever heard anyone else say anything other, like in my personal life, I don't think I've ever heard anyone else say anything other than roundabout. But apparently across the country people do. Okay, slide 23. What is your generic term for a sweetened carbonated beverage? I would say soda. Soda, right? But my mom, she'll go back and forth between soda or pop. Usually, most of the time now she says soda, but when I was younger she used to say pop a lot. And you can, obviously by looking at the map, you see it's very strong in certain areas, whether you say soda or whether you say pop, whether you say soft drink. Like I feel like when we look on a menu, like even here, we see that usually it's like soft drink, so we know what that term means, but I don't think anyone's like, you're going to a friend's house, hey, do you want a soft drink? No, you'd be like, hey, do you want a soda? Or hey, do you want a pop? But also there's another option here. If you say Coke, you might be thinking, this is such a good example about language, you might be thinking that's strange because Coke is a very specific type. So how could you possibly say, I want a Coke? What if you really like want like a Sprite or something, but Coke is the generic term for soda? Like, how does that work? But I'll say, like, think about it when you say, like, I need a Kleenex. That's a brand. What you really mean is, I want a tissue, but you're using the more specific brand name to reference like the generic term. So we do that. We just don't think about it that way. So when I've had students like Coke, that's weird. We do it in other ways. We just don't pick it apart that same way. But there are obviously like regions of the country where they would use the word Coke, meaning just like any type of soda. Okay, so slide 24. Ooh. There's a lot of options for this one. Okay, how do you say that word? I would say crayon. There are two options. So there are a couple options. Crayon. Wait. Where the second syllable rhymes with dawn. Crayon. How is that different from the first one? Okay, look at this with me. How is the first option is 2 syllables, crayon. The second option, crayon. It's like a slight difference. Am I reading that wrong? I feel like those first two are like basically the same. Okay. And then the next one, as in man, crayon. And the last one, pronounce this as crown. Huh. There's some really interesting options for this word. It seems like this very sporadic across the country too. I guess I would say crayon, but I don't understand how for the first one and the second one are different. Crayon, maybe a slight difference. Okay. Slide 25. What do you call the little gray creature? I don't remember this one. Okay. Oh, yes, I do. What do you call the little gray creature that looks like an insect but is actually a crustacean that rolls up into a ball when you touch it? We call these, when I was a kid, roly-polies. And it's like the first one, roly-poly. And when I grew up in California, as you can see, it's like red there, but it's a really strong red in like in the South and like parts of like the I'm kind of extending like even into the Midwest a little bit. Roly-poly. And then another option is a pill bug, which I've never heard, but apparently it's an option people use. Or I've heard potato bug. I've definitely heard that. And actually, if you're looking here at the map where we are, we're definitely in the red, but like in Nevada, it looks like it's kind of split between those. And then there's another option. I have no idea what that creature is. It's probably because they don't have that bug in those regions, obviously, right? But roly-poly. Another way of like, I think it's just the cutest way. Roly-poly. So cute. Okay. Some other options. So, do you use the term firefly or do you use the term lightning bug? I've never seen one in real life, but when I know what it is, I would say firefly. But I've heard both terms. It looks like this one's definitely kind of split more like middle of the like east to west in the country on this one. Slide 27. Do you say garage sale, yard sale, rummage sale, or tag sale? I've never used the term rummage or tag sale. But I think I've used interchangeably garage sale or yard sale. Like, to me, they're the same thing, obviously. I've heard both, and I've used both. 28, slide 28. Garbage can or trash can? And then you start thinking, what do I call it? Like the one that's in your house. Trash can. Garbage can. I feel like I would say garbage can. But I feel like I would say take out the trash, not take out the garbage. I don't know. Now you're like, how do I say that? I don't know how it is. How do I say that? Okay. 29. Do you say semi-truck or semi? Do you say 18-wheeler? Do you say tractor trailer? This one's definitely, look at the south, east coast, and then the rest of the country. This one's very split. I would say semi, but I've heard other people say like 18-wheeler. It looks like the majority of the country say semi or semi-truck. Let's slide 30. Do you say tennis shoes or sneakers? I feel like in my mind, tennis shoes and sneakers are different things. Maybe it's a generational thing. Like, when I hear sneakers, I think very specifically like athletic shoes. But tennis shoes to me are more like casual, like walking shoes. But maybe that's just me, I don't know. And then Hawaii, apparently they just say shoes. Okay. Slide 31. Do you say drinking fountain or water fountain? Or do you say bubbler? I think I'm going to start saying bubbler now because it's so cute. Drinking fountain, water fountain. First of all, when was the last time I saw one of these in public? I feel like they're definitely like kind of going, you know, we don't see those often, like telephone booths, you know. Drinking fountain, water fountain. I feel like I would say water fountain. I don't know. But if someone used, like to me, both of them sound totally fine. Okay, those are some really interesting, like in class, it's always so much more fun to talk about those, but hopefully you guys had fun following along with, you know, that. Okay, so slide 32. There's a quick video, watch this. This is just a little bit more about dialect and about sometimes even more specifically, not just like general like south, east, you know, west, but even more specific. So hopefully these two guys in this picture, this does not date me. I'm sure it does. So if you do not know who those two guys are, that's Bill and Ted. A very quintessential movie from my childhood, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. If you have not seen this movie, please, like, I'm sure it's like free on YouTube or something. Please watch this movie. It is so good. And but it's a good movie to reference in terms of like the way that they're speaking, this very kind of like surfer kind of style. So think back, you know, like in the 80s and the 90s, we saw a lot of this like West Coast stuff, like, you know, kind of like surfer or like Valley Girl. And so every generation, there's kind of like a way that we see like youth kind of talking in different ways, even like regionally, how it's different. So this video gets into this in something called the vocal fry. I'm not going to try to do it for you, just watch this like 4-minute video. But this just gets into just like the way, like the tones and how we use language is really important. Slide 33, a little bit more on like kind of nonverbal communication, the way we use hand gestures. Obviously, most of us know multiple hand gestures that convey certain meanings to certain things, both positive and negative. And obviously these are going to be culturally different. So what expression you might use here, like a hand gesture that you might use here might actually have a very different meaning somewhere else. So culturally, these are different. But even within, you know, our own, you know, your own culture, there are multiple ones that you can use that can convey a lot of information. And then the last slide, this is just getting a little bit more about nonverbal, that the way we communicate, it's not always about how we, even when it's just verbal, how we say it, when we say it, at what volume we say it, all those things are really important. But there's so much more also going on with the way we communicate in terms of like, as I'm doing now, how do we use our hands when we're speaking, more or less, what our face is doing. Often you can learn a lot about what someone's thinking, not even really with what they say to you, but how they're reacting with their face, how their posture is, how they are in communication with you, like are they leaning in, you know, are they sitting back, are their arms crossed, you know, are they touching you while they're talking? Like there's so much more going on with the way we communicate than just the words that we're saying. And then obviously this is going to differ from culture to culture. Okay, so that's it for this one. Sorry, kind of a lot going on with that one. It's early for me, so like I feel like I stumbled across a couple of things, but we got through it. And then of course we had a really weird distraction. I'm surprised that's the first time this semester that's happened, that he's been in the background. Whatever. Okay, but just to kind of recap what I said earlier about I did the 2 extra credits. So the first one was up to 3 examples and 1 point each for a word that is a new word that we use now, or an expression, or maybe it's not a new word, but we're using the word in a different way. And like I said, oftentimes like slang, these are really good examples of this. I remember one last semester, one of my students was like dabbing. So like, obviously that's not a brand new word, but we're using it in a very different way. And then the second extra credit was the colloquialisms or cultural expressions. So you can give me up to 3 for those, and you can get a point each for that. So an opportunity right now it would probably take you all of like 3 minutes to type out for me. It could get you up to 6 points extra credit. So I know I did extra credit on a previous PowerPoint for you guys. I'd offered, and I had maybe like 5 or 6 students submit it. So either people are watching the videos and they just don't really need the extra credit points, or some of you aren't watching the video. Like that's on you guys. I don't know. But for those of you who do, continue to watch them, and you know, you have this opportunity for some extra credit. And okay, so that's it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.